Imagine standing on a stage with millions of eyes watching you. Every breath, every pause, every movement amplified to the world. The weight of expectation presses down on your shoulders. In that moment, one word spoken wrong, one step miscalculated, could unravel years of hard work and remind the world not of your greatness, but of your most painful mistakes. Most people would crumble under that kind of pressure. Their minds would freeze, their confidence would shatter, and the fear of failure would consume them. But Will Smith is different. He has built his entire life and career around moments exactly like these. Not because he has been immune to failure. Far from it. In fact, his story is filled with failures, and not the quiet, hidden ones most of us experience in private. No, his failures have been broadcasted to the world. Painful, raw, unforgettable. He has stumbled in music, in acting, in business, and even in his personal life, where the entire world was watching. Yet instead of allowing those failures to define him, he used them as fire. Instead of seeing them as endings, he treated them as beginnings. Each setback became a stepping stone, each rejection became redirection, and each mistake became an invitation to grow stronger. This is the mindset that separates Will Smith from the crowd. It's not about avoiding failure. It's about learning how to dance with it, to embrace it, to transform it into the very energy that propels you forward. And here's the truth. This mindset isn't reserved for Hollywood stars or global icons. It's a psychological shift that anyone, yes, even you, can make. Because once you stop seeing failure as a dead end and start seeing it as the blueprint for progress, you don't just change your outcomes. You rewire your brain. You create a new relationship with fear, with risk, and with success itself. So today, we're going to dive deep into the psychology behind Will Smith's transformation. We'll uncover how he reshaped his narrative, turned failure into fuel, and crafted a life that reflects resilience at its highest level. And more importantly, we'll explore how you can take these same principles and apply them to your own journey, so that failure no longer stops you, but instead guides you toward the happiness and success you've always wanted. Do you want me to continue extending this into the next part of the script with Will Smith's actual failures and the psychology behind them? Or should I just keep deepening the introduction hook even further before moving on? Imagine standing on a stage with millions of eyes watching you, knowing that the next word you say, the next step you take, could either lift you higher than ever before, or remind the world of your most painful failures. The lights are blinding, the cameras are rolling, and every breath you take feels heavier than the last. For most people, that kind of pressure would crush their spirit. They would freeze, retreat, or play it safe. But Will Smith has built his entire life around moments like these. Not because he has never failed. Far from it. He has failed publicly, painfully, and repeatedly. From career setbacks to deeply personal mistakes that played out in front of the whole world, Will Smith has faced the kind of failures most of us spend our lives trying to avoid. And yet, he kept showing up. Here's the truth. Failure has been his stage, his classroom, and his greatest teacher. While others run from it, Will leaned into it. Instead of letting failure carve scars on his identity, he chose to let it sculpt his resilience. Instead of letting criticism bury him, he allowed it to sharpen him. And that's what makes him different. Think about it. Every time life pushed him down, he stood back up, not as the same man, but as a stronger version of himself. Each rejection, each mistake, became fuel for reinvention. And it wasn't luck. It wasn't talent alone. It was mindset. It was the decision to look at failure not as the end of the story, but as the beginning of growth. And that's what we're here to uncover. Because Will Smith's story isn't just about Hollywood, fame, or fortune, it's about psychology. It's about the mental frameworks that allow a human being to stand in the fire of failure and come out not weaker, but wiser. So today we're going to explore how his mindset shift not only transformed his career but also reveals a powerful psychology lesson for all of us. The kind of lesson that can rewire your brain to use failure as a stepping stone toward happiness, success, and a deeper sense of peace. Because here's the secret. Failure isn't your enemy, it's your invitation. And the way Will Smith learned to answer that invitation is the very key to turning setbacks into the foundation of a life you're proud to live. Will Smith's early struggles. Before Hollywood, before the blockbuster movies, before the global fame, Will Smith was just a young rapper from Philadelphia. His rise was quick. Almost too quick. At just 20 years old, he became the face of hip-hop's breakthrough moment, winning the first ever Grammy for rap alongside DJ Jazzy Jeff. Imagine that, a teenager from the streets of Philly standing on the world stage, crowned as a pioneer in music history. Success seemed inevitable. Money poured in. Fame surrounded him. From the outside, it looked like the beginning of a dream life. But beneath the surface, Will's story was about to take a devastating turn. With rapid success came rapid spending. Cars, houses, parties. He thought the money would never end. Yet, the truth was harsh. He didn't understand money, and he trusted the wrong people. Soon, the IRS came knocking. They didn't just take a piece of his earnings. They seized nearly everything he owned, including his home. Overnight, the young star who once stood on the Grammy stage as a millionaire was broke, humiliated, and forced back to square one. Now pause for a second. Imagine that happening to you. One day, you're celebrated as the next big thing. The next, you're walking through your empty house, stripped of everything, drowning in regret. Most people would crumble under that weight. Most would let the shame eat them alive. But this is where Will's psychology kicked in, where his story stopped being about music and started being about mindset. Instead of hiding, instead of letting the world label him as a failure, Will asked himself a question that changed everything. What can I learn from this? And that simple, almost childlike question became the seed of transformation. Because psychology shows us this, people who overcome great setbacks don't do it by denying pain, but by reframing it. They don't see failure as the end of the road. They see it as the start of a new one. Will Smith wasn't just broke. He was being forced to grow. He wasn't just losing money. He was gaining wisdom. That failure didn't break him. It rewired him. The science of turning failure into fuel. This is where science meets story. Psychologists call it cognitive reframing. It's the ability to change the way your brain interprets a painful event so it empowers you instead of destroying you. For Will, losing everything wasn't proof that he was a loser. It was proof that he had more to learn. About money, about discipline, about resilience. And here's the fascinating part. Neuroscience shows that reframing failure literally changes your brain chemistry. Normally, when we fail, the brain triggers a threat response. Cortisol, the stress hormone, floods your system. You feel panic, shame, and helplessness. Your mind shuts down, convinced that you're in danger. That's why most people give up after failing. They get stuck in survival mode. But when you consciously reframe failure, when you tell yourself, this isn't the end. This is a lesson. The brain responds differently. Instead of pumping out cortisol, it releases dopamine, the chemical of motivation, learning, and growth. Dopamine lights up the reward pathways in the brain, making you feel energized, focused, and ready to try again. In other words, the way you think about failure doesn't just change your mood. It changes your biology. Will Smith didn't just rebuild his finances. He rewired his brain. And that's why, instead of disappearing into obscurity, he made the leap from music to television, landing the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. What most people saw as the end of his career was actually the foundation of his greatest success. Will Smith's mindset on rejection. But financial trouble wasn't the last obstacle. When Will transitioned into acting, Hollywood didn't take him seriously. Casting directors doubted that a rapper could succeed on screen. They looked at him as entertainment, not as a serious actor. Rejection after rejection piled up. Auditions ended in silence. Opportunities slipped through his hands, and the doubt in other people's eyes became almost louder than their words. And yet, Will did something that revealed the psychology behind his success. He studied failure. He didn't just hear no, he dissected it. He wanted to know why. He asked questions, sought out mentors, analyzed his performances, and looked at the details others might ignore. Where another person might have walked away with shame, Will walked away with notes. That difference in approach was everything. He studied other actors relentlessly, watching films frame by frame, learning the craft with the discipline of a scientist. He trained obsessively, not just in acting but in self-mastery. Because for Will, rejection wasn't a wall, it was a classroom. This is where his now famous philosophy emerged. You don't try to build a wall. You lay one brick as perfectly as you can, and soon you'll have a wall. That philosophy is more than motivational words. It's a psychological masterclass. Instead of letting the overwhelming big picture crush him, Will zoomed into the smallest possible step. One brick. One audition. One improvement. Then another. And another. Behavioral psychology backs this up. The brain thrives on micro-goals. Breaking challenges into smaller, achievable actions creates dopamine feedback loops that reward effort and build resilience. It's not about giant leaps. It's about tiny, consistent steps that reshape habits and confidence. In essence, Will wasn't just building a career. He was rewiring his brain, training himself to turn rejection into resilience. Public failure on the biggest stage. Now, let's fast forward to something the world can't forget. The 2016 Oscars. Will Smith didn't receive an expected nomination for his film Concussion. For many, this was supposed to be his moment. Years of hard work, powerful performances, and undeniable influence. Yet his name wasn't on the list. The disappointment wasn't private. It was public. It was loud. The situation turned into controversy when he and his wife Jada chose to boycott the event. The media pounced, critics debated, and the narrative of his career seemed to wobble. People whispered that his reputation had been damaged, that he was fading, that his golden era was over. For many, this would have been the breaking point. But Will's psychology didn't allow him to stay down. Instead of shrinking, he came back sharper. He doubled down on his craft, choosing roles that were riskier, more demanding, more uncomfortable. He didn't play safe, he played bold. And soon enough, he proved the doubters wrong by stepping back into the spotlight. Not as just a celebrity, but as a respected actor whose persistence had outlasted the storm. This cycle of rejection and comeback isn't just resilience. It's the science of neuroplasticity in action. When the brain is forced to adapt, to survive setbacks, it doesn't just bounce back. It rewires itself. New neural pathways form. Old fears weaken. Determination strengthens. Creativity sharpens. Will Smith literally trained his brain to interpret failure not as the end of the story, but as the raw material for growth. Every rejection was a lesson. Every setback was data. Every failure became a brick in the wall he was building. And that wall wasn't just his career, it was his mindset, his character, his legacy. The slap and a new lesson on failure. We can't talk about Will Smith without mentioning the most controversial moment of his life. The infamous Oscar slap in 2022. It was raw, shocking, and unforgettable. 1 second, Will was poised to win the biggest award of his career, and the next, he was walking onto the stage and doing something that stunned the world. In front of millions of viewers, in front of his peers, he slapped comedian Chris Rock. The crowd gasped, social media exploded, and in a matter of seconds, Will Smith's image, carefully built over decades, was fractured. For many, that moment wasn't just shocking. It was heartbreaking. Here was the man who inspired us with stories of resilience, positivity, and discipline, suddenly defined by a loss of control. And that's the fascinating part. Because psychology tells us this. Even the strongest minds, even the most disciplined people, are still vulnerable to triggers. Underneath success, fame, and charisma, every human being carries unresolved emotions, wounds, and insecurities. Sometimes, all it takes is one spark to bring them to the surface. What followed was perhaps the hardest chapter of Will's life. Overnight, the man who was once Hollywood's golden boy became the center of ridicule. Headlines labeled him violent, memes mocked him relentlessly, and the Academy banned him from attending the Oscars for 10 years. He lost brand deals, projects, and most painfully, the trust of millions of fans. For someone who had spent his life crafting a legacy of inspiration, this wasn't just failure. It was public humiliation on the largest stage possible. Now, here's where psychology makes this story so important. Most people, when faced with a mistake of this magnitude, choose denial or defense. They justify, they lash out, or they hide. But Will didn't run. He didn't erase it from his story. Instead, he did something incredibly rare. He leaned into the discomfort. He acknowledged his shame. He admitted to his brokenness. He openly shared that the incident forced him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. This is where a profound psychological principle emerges. Radical ownership. Radical ownership means taking full responsibility, even when it's painful, even when it feels easier to blame the world. Neuroscience supports this idea. When we take ownership, something powerful happens in the brain. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, decision-making, and self-control, activates. This activation shifts us out of survival mode, where emotions rule us, and into growth mode, where we can process, reflect, and rebuild. Will's story after the slap is living proof of this process. Instead of trying to erase the past, he began rebuilding, brick by brick, just as he once taught his younger self. Quietly, without noise, without the spotlight, he worked on himself. He sought therapy. He reflected on his triggers. He reconnected with his family and mentors. He practiced humility in a way he had never been forced to before. And while the journey is far from over, the lesson is clear. Resilience is not about avoiding mistakes, it's about how you rise after them. From a psychological perspective, the slap wasn't just a personal failure. It was a mirror of the human condition. It revealed how ego, unhealed pain, and unchecked emotions can sabotage even the strongest among us. But it also revealed the path forward. Growth isn't born from perfection. It's born from imperfection, from breakdowns, from the courage to say, yes, I failed. And now I'll build again. The bigger lesson? Failure doesn't define you unless you let it. Shame only owns you if you refuse to face it. Will Smith's journey reminds us that no matter how public, how painful, or how humiliating a mistake may be, it can still be the beginning of transformation. Because in the end, your legacy isn't built in the moments when you shine. It's built in the moments when the world watches you fall, and you choose to rise anyway. What we learn from Will Smith's shift. So, what does Will Smith's story teach us? At first glance, it may seem like just another celebrity tale of highs and lows, but if you look deeper, you'll see something much more universal. His journey reflects a truth that psychology has been trying to tell us for decades. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the foundation of success. Think about it. If you only ever won, if you only ever succeeded, your brain would never adapt. Growth happens when you stumble, when you make mistakes, when the world points out your cracks and you're forced to rebuild stronger. Will's story is proof that the cracks aren't the end of you. They're the beginning of a new, better version of you. And here's the part that most people miss. How you frame failure determines everything. The moment something goes wrong, your brain has two choices. It can shut down in shame, replaying the mistake over and over, convincing you that you're not good enough. Or it can power up, treating failure like feedback, like data that shows you what to do differently next time. Will Smith chose the second path. That choice didn't erase his failures, but it made them meaningful. Psychology calls this cognitive reframing. It's when you change the way you interpret an event, and suddenly, the meaning shifts. What once looked like an ending becomes a beginning. What once felt like humiliation transforms into a hidden lesson. And here's the beauty. When your brain learns to reframe failure, it doesn't just survive setbacks, it thrives on them. But let's get practical. Because success is not one giant leap. It's a series of tiny steps. Will has often described it with the metaphor of building a wall. You don't set out to build the biggest, strongest wall all at once. You focus on laying one perfect brick every single day. And eventually, without even realizing it, those bricks turn into something unbreakable. This is more than motivation. It's neuroscience. Every small, consistent action rewires your brain's pathways. Each time you show up, even after failing, your brain learns resilience. It learns persistence. It learns that discomfort is not danger. It's growth in progress. And then there's the hardest part of all. Radical ownership. Because failure doesn't just test your ability to endure. It tests your willingness to take responsibility. Blame is easy. Pointing fingers at circumstances, critics, or even fate. It's tempting, but it keeps you powerless. Ownership is harder. It requires courage to look in the mirror and say, yes, I made that choice. And now, I choose differently. Will Smith's story shows us this truth vividly. He didn't deny his mistakes. He didn't hide from them. Instead, he owned them, and by owning them, he reclaimed control. And that's the turning point for anyone who feels broken. Ownership transforms failure into fuel. So, what's the real lesson here? Will Smith's mindset isn't about avoiding pain. It's about transforming pain into power. It's not about never falling. It's about learning to rise higher each time you do. And this is where you come in. Maybe you're carrying the weight of rejection. Maybe you're haunted by a mistake that feels impossible to forgive. Or maybe you've been knocked down so many times that getting back up feels pointless. But remember this. Your brain is wired to grow. Science proves it, stories like Will Smith's prove it, and your life can prove it too. If you let every failure become a stepping stone. Because failure is not the final word. It's the raw material of greatness. And the question is, will you let it break you, or will you use it to build the strongest version of yourself? So, the next time you fail, and you will because failure is not a question of if but when, pause. Don't rush to distract yourself, don't scramble to hide it, and don't let shame consume you. Instead, take a breath and ask yourself one simple but life-changing question. Am I going to let this break me, or am I going to let this build me? Because failure, when looked at closely, is not an enemy. It's a mirror. It reflects back to us the truth about where we are, what we lack, and most importantly, what we are capable of becoming. Will Smith's story shows us that even the hardest fall, even the most public mistake, can become a stage for transformation. The question is not whether you will fall. The question is whether you will use the ground you hit as a foundation to push yourself higher. Think about it. Every successful person you admire has faced a breaking point. A moment that could have defined them as a failure forever, or propelled them into greatness. Will Smith's infamous slap could have ended his career. It could have made him a cautionary tale. But instead, he chose to sit with the pain, confront the embarrassment, own the mistake, and slowly, brick by brick, rebuild. That is not weakness. That is power. The difference between falling and flying is not the absence of pain. It's the presence of perspective. Falling hurts, no doubt. It bruises your ego, it rattles your confidence, and it makes you question everything. But flying comes from using the fall as fuel, from deciding that the setback is not the final chapter but the first line of a new one. So the next time life knocks you down, whether it's a rejection, a failure, or a mistake you wish you could take back, remember this. You are not defined by the fall. You are defined by what you build after it. Will Smith proved it. History proves it. Psychology proves it. And deep down, your own story will prove it too. Because every fall carries within it the wings of flight, if you dare to rise again.